Oh, well, I'll go ahead and start. I'm Thomas Turnbull, Tom_O_T on most things Drupal. I gave the same presentation in Copenhagen a few months back with Alan Palazzolo, who's at ZZOLO on most things Drupal. So I've just left up his name on here just because he put a ton of work into this and deserves a lot of credit. He's also one of the co-maintainers of the module. I'm not, I'm just a user and patcher and fixer. So I work in New York. I work with Tim and a few other people for Zagat. We're moving everything over to Drupal there, and I came from a background of working in, I'm a geography undergraduate a few years ago. I ended up doing web stuff and was working for a nonprofit called GreenMap. We used the GMap module in location a few years ago, back in 2005. When I came here, I've been seeing a lot of cool stuff done with OpenLayers, and so that gave me a good chance to dig in and do lots of stuff with restaurants and location and search. So feel free to just ask questions as we go through. We're in a small group, so.
I'll start right now. Are you going to be able to have this posted later?
It's all available on GitHub, so you can just.
Okay, excellent.
You can browse it there, or you can clone it and have it for yourself.
Perfect.
Where is it available?
Sorry, available?
On GitHub. I'll put a link up at the end.
Okay.
And also, if you just search mapping in Drupal with OpenLayers, you'll find the Copenhagen presentation, which I think has a direct link. So, yeah, just shout out. I love geeking out about maps, so happy to talk about anything or just grab me afterwards. This session is just going to be a quick overview of what it is and why you might want to use it. And I'll not compare it too heavily to the other modules, but I'll talk about some of the differences. I'll talk about the configuration, because that's probably the hardest thing with this, is just getting it working with Drupal. There's a few things it does in pretty weird ways. We've tried to improve the documentation, but hopefully this will be enough to get you going and playing with some maps yourself. I mean, first of all, it's an overview of why you might want to use maps. It's just a great user interface. It's a great way to explore data or find what you're looking for. Like, hands up if you've not used Google Maps in the last 2 days.
Yahoo Maps.
Or Yahoo Maps, whatever. And I'll come to that, but that's a good point of like which maps you like using. And it's great to use with Drupal because Drupal is a great vehicle for data. It's a great content management system. At GreenMap, I built kind of a big open source mapping project there. And Drupal is just a great way to make it very easy for people to enter data. It's not like they had to interact with some really complicated GIS system. It's just as simple as writing a blog post or something, typing in an address. OpenLayers isn't anything to do with Drupal. OpenLayers is a open source JavaScript library that is basically an abstraction layer on top of other maps. So you can use it as a way of interacting with Google Maps, with Yahoo Maps, Bing Maps, OpenStreetMap, and OpenBikeMap, and I'll show some of these examples by clicking. So here it is on a Drupal site. It's the map of the world. I don't know why we might want to zoom in a second. But you can switch between demo fairies or having their way with me. It's meant to be a map.
I bet your internet probably.
Oh, thank you. That would help if I connected. So all my other slides were independent of the internet working, but this one I've changed to here. So let's see. I'll come back to that in a second. Let's just talk about it. It was a project of OSGeo. It's a completely open source JavaScript library. You can go in, you can see the source code, you can change the source code, you can extend it, you can patch it, whatever you want to do. It has an IRC room, pound OpenLayers on Freenode. I'll have some more links to that sort of stuff. OpenLayers.org. I love it as a library. It's not as well documented or widely used as the Google Maps API, but it does have some documentation and it is getting a lot of traction. So just as a kind of example, like, unless you saw my slide that answers this question, who can guess where this is, or who knows where this map is? No, but it's on a coast. That's definitely
Manhattan?
no. This is what Israel, parts of Israel look like if you use the Google Maps API. If you go to maps.google.com, it looks like this. But if you're using the API to pull that's the exact place. Like, look at the pattern. It's the exact same place through the API on maps.google.com. Because Maps is not open source, it's all about licensing, they don't have the appropriate license to display the streets and names. And here it is on OpenStreetMap. OpenStreetMap is completely open source. You can do what you want with that data. It is data that comes from open source, from like in America, a lot of it comes from the government. Elsewhere, it comes from just people like us who are map geeks going around with GPS and like mapping where the roads are. I could go on and on about how awesome it is to have open source maps, but that's a little bit off topic, but we can go into that later if you want. So the Drupal implementation, some people, Zolo, TMCW, and a bunch of others have written a Drupal module that pulls that in. And that basically uses the JavaScript library and integrates it with views. It does some other things as well, but basically it integrates with views. So you can do whatever you normally do with views and say, instead of displaying this as a list or a table, display it on a map. Integrates very well with CCK and views, has all the views filters, and anything you can do with views, pretty much you can do with map data now.
So does that mean you can pull out like street names and map them? So you can tie the view data.
So basically it's
to
whatever
the
you've got on your node. So you can say, show me all nodes that have been tagged as being a bar and display them on a map. Or show me all bars that are near this address. You'd have to use some other way of turning that address into a Latin long, but there's other modules that do that. So, and I'll talk about some of these other like add-ons and different ways of doing things, different recipes, but that's the basics of it. And it uses the CTools plugin architecture, and if any of you are in the last session with Earl Miles talking about the JavaScript framework in Drupal 7, it does all that sort of stuff. So it's not been ported to 7 yet, but it's not going to be a particularly big job because it's just a JavaScript abstraction. It's just some integration points. So to get into how it actually works in Drupal, there are a few concepts to get your head around. And to make a map, basically you've got to have a preset. And a preset, as it says here, is a collection of settings that define a map. So it's the images that are used on the map, like the zoom buttons. It's which layers you want to be in that map. So OpenLayers is a selection of layers. And you've got your base layers, which are like your map tiles. And they might come from Google, they might come from OpenStreetMap, they might be your own crazy custom map tiles that you generated that are like a pirate map that you scanned in. And you can do weird stuff like that. And then you've got your data layers as well, which are like maybe a KML feed, or it's some data that's coming from views. And then you've got styles, like I want to have some points on my map showing where bars are, or where restaurants are. And so you need to say, a restaurant is defined by a flag, or a little knife and fork. I want to draw bike routes. Bike routes are in blue, walking routes are in red. So those are your styles. And then you've got behaviors. And I'll go into some examples of those. But just to look at what a preset is. So this is all under, once you enable the module, site building, OpenLayers, presets. So here's one preset for my basic demo. Has a title, description, width, height, an image path, and I'll show you what those look like as we look at it. We've defined our center and bounds. Let's log into my guest account while we're here. And we've got a default center point, zoom level. We've chosen to restrict extent. We've got some behaviors turned on. We've got an attribution, so I can say this map came from wherever. We've got fill screen buttons, keyboards, shortcuts. These are all turned on. Then our layers and styles. We've got, I'm using a custom base layer because I imported a bunch of tiles onto my machine, so I wouldn't have to worry about things not working. But you could say I want to use Yahoo as my base layer, or Google, or OpenStreetMap.
Could you make your text a little larger?
Absolutely, yeah, sorry.
What are the two kinds of map projection there?
There's just different ways of saying where something is on the Earth, and I'm not enough of a map geek to be able to explain what those are. But if you find something that you're trying to map stuff and your points are all not where you'd expect them to be, it's probably because the
Okay.
So like Mercator versus some other option?
I don't even know. Is there any?
Yeah, that first one is Google's version of Mercator. The second one, 4326, is plot carré, which is just everything square, everything
Oh, okay.
perfect rectangle.
Basically how big Greenland looks.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, there's some beautiful examples out there of like what map projections are and why they matter. Like, you know, I couldn't tell you which is which, but it's good. Like, this has built in. You can choose which projection you're using for your map, so that just
Yeah.
having it is amazing.
It confuses me why you've got the first one selected, but then in the display projection text area, you've got 4326.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
No, I mean it's something to do with, you know, it's just part of the open. I think you can probably have.
Okay.
No idea, sorry. So the way this looks. So here's our map of Copenhagen, and so here we've got some custom graphics for the zoom, which was something we were able to set just through that configuration, and so you can actually start to make your maps look a bit more beautiful and a bit more different from your generic OpenStreetMap graphics or your Google graphics. Just win. And so some of the behaviors I've enabled, like the full screen button. So that was what a preset is, and that will probably make a bit more sense as I go through some of the different things that go into that preset. So part of that preset was layers. We got tile sets. We can have vector data, which is like lines and points coming from views, or our external views. So let's look at some of these in more details. So in this case, we've got an XML feed, which came from the Drupal Copenhagen list of interesting points. It's just an XML file, and probably just. Sorry, it doesn't look very nice. But anyway, so this is an XML feed that has some lats and longs in there. We give it a name, title, description, and then in our preset, click on layers and styles. Shows up in there. That's the one that's enabled. We've chosen a particular style to associate with it, and then this is what it looks like. Our style set, use this red marker for points of interest.
So you're not using Drupal content at all. You're just using what's in that XML file.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Does that have a mechanism for turning on and off different layers and some sort of, select boxes?
Yep, so this thing over here on the right is your layer selector, and you can enable that behavior or not, depending on whether you want it. In this case, we've only got one layer enabled, so you can turn that on and off. But yeah, that's where it starts to get really interesting, because you can have different bits of information coming from different places and display them on different layers, and people can start to visualize what's going on in pretty powerful ways. Any questions so far?
So then you're using this with maps, but this could be used with video or other things that are.
How do you mean using it with video?
Like if you wanted to create a layer or something, put something